So I just got back from a writing retreat that I did with the Wright Brothers Collective. It was like 15 singer-songwriters, producers, artists, and we all just got into a cabin together and wrote like 30-something songs over the course of a week. And it was a lot of fun, and I was really thankful that they invited me. And while we were in this process of like writing a song in the morning, breaking for lunch, writing another song in the afternoon, maybe another one in the evening, I noticed everybody in the group was just having a great time. Everybody was really dialed in with each other, and we were all kind of doing the same thing in terms of writing etiquette, I guess you would call it. And I figured I would take a minute and talk about the thought process I have when it comes to co-writing, things I've observed in sessions I've been a part of, good ones and bad ones, and try to give some perspective on how to be a good writing partner, because I feel like it's like one of those topics that's like not really prevalent on YouTube. And again, disclaimer, this is my experiences. If you have experienced things other than that, please put them down in the comments below. I feel like this would be like a really fun topic for us to sort of dive into. But before I jump into that, again, really quick plug. I am moving to Nashville in a few months, so if you're looking for private lessons on audio or songwriting, or if you'd like to open up a production project with me, I have a lot of slots open for those. Links in the description. So I think before I jump into the larger topics and nitty-gritty of how to do a co-write, I think there's some things I want to talk about first. The main thing is everything I'm talking about in this video is my recollection of almost like a bullet time Sherlock Holmes slow motion moment. Most of the things I'm talking about in this video are not going to be things that are like you need to hold all of them in your head at once, because it'd be pretty overwhelming. But I think a helpful way to look at this is when you encounter some of these problems, or if you catch yourself in a certain mindset over and over again, maybe reference back to this. I think the second expectation you need to have is every single room is going to be different. When you are talking with other songwriters, artists, producers, you are encountering their childhood favorite band mixed with their sensibilities and musicianship, mixed with their experience with other writers, and you have that plus a whole lot more in every single person that you write with. So when you go into a room, just expect there to be a little bit of like feeling each other out. It's almost like you're on a first date with like 3 people. I think another thing to note about when you are deciding who you should do a write with and who you shouldn't do a write with, know that like a piece of that person will be in the song at some point. I know that's like a weird way of wording it, but like if you don't want somebody's sensibilities, writing style to be in the song that you're a part of, they shouldn't have been invited into the session. And I say that as somebody who has been in some sessions where they've worked out, some where they haven't worked out. Like there are some sessions where I've been in the room and one person has such a strong vision for what they want the song to be before we've started writing it, that like any person's sensibilities that deviate slightly from that vision of where they imagine the song will be, they just immediately get shut down over and over and over again. And there almost needs to be like a band style consensus of like, okay, we are a band, we are doing all this together. If we just wanted it to be this one person's sound, this one person would go write everything by themselves and then bring it to a band setting. But since we are all collected here as songwriters, there's going to be a little bit of a give and take of, it's not going to perfectly be the vision of what you have for it in your head. There's going to be a lot of discovery, and there's going to be a lot of participation from other people in that discovery. Some other practical things are, what is this song going to be used for? This isn't a discussion that always needs to happen before you start writing, but sometimes when it comes to the initial booking of a session, it can be helpful to be like, hey, this is going to be for sync, or this is going to be someone's artist project, or this is something we're going to pitch to so-and-so. I think that that gives people a better framework for what they're trying to deliver on as a writer, but also it can help as like an expectation setter, because if somebody goes through a session thinking that they're doing like this very personal artist project, singer-songwriter thing, and then somebody says, what if we pitched this to sync? It's not that that is bad, it's just, it's better to know stuff like that ahead of time. It's not always possible, but when you can, if you know that you're gonna be writing for something specific, let the other people know, because there are some writers who just like categorically don't want to work on anything sync, or they don't want to work on anything that is pitch based. And it's best to give those people a heads up of, hey, this is what we're going to be writing for, so that they can give a yes or a no based off of what they want to work on. It also forces people to sort of answer the uncomfortable questions of like, is this session worth our time? Like if somebody tries to get a group together and say, hey, let's pitch this song to sync, but nobody in the group has any connections with the sync licensing world, none of them have a publishing deal, none of them have any relationships with people in sync, none None of them have brought a song to sync. Sometimes that stating of like what the session is going to be about is how people can determine like whether it's worth their time or not. I think another great, I don't want to say expectation, because sometimes you'll just find it as the session progresses, but I think the idea of a song captain can be really helpful, which is terminology that I borrowed from my friends in a band called Run the Race Kid. Basically the idea of like there is somebody in the room who is like the executive producer who has the final say over something. Like in rooms where everything is actually a pure democracy, things tend to not get done. And it doesn't need to be like a stringent like iron fist thing, but having one person who's designated as sort of like the vision leader or somebody who just has the final say of yes or no. I think using references is a great way to do this, because there've been so many sessions I've jumped into where I'm complete strangers with all these people, but then somebody references a song for an artist that I like and I'm like, oh dude, I love that person. And immediately we're able to like lock in on like this shared musical knowledge, but also just like we're fans of the same music, and so we're able to connect on that level. So trying to get like a connection point like that as soon as possible can be really helpful. And then probably the most important concept when it comes to writing with other people is what I will call this scale of agreeability to disagreeability. And I'll explain what I mean by that. On one end of the scale, and there are people who just are naturally this as their personality type, who want to be as agreeable as possible. They don't want to step on anyone's toes. They don't want to cause any strife. But that emotional desire taken too far turns into them either being a yes man, where every single idea somebody says is just validated because it's an idea, not really advocating for their own ideas that much or for other people's ideas that they like. Like if there's somebody who's a little bit more of a domineering presence, or if they're just like a louder personality and they say, hey, we go over here, this very agreeable person tends to just like shut down and not really fight for their ideas that much. So the desire to like be a good writer and be agreeable and be a good collaborator has a good side, because then you're able to support and validate people who have good ideas in the session, but then there's a bad side to it as well. Going all the way to the other side, which is somebody who is a very type A personality, you know, they do not struggle to voice what their ideas are when they think that they're good. So there's a lot of confidence in the room and there's a lot of strength there. But then the dark side of that is it can be really easy to squash other people and step over them. I have been in some rooms where one person for 4 hours did 99% of the talking, and it felt like everyone else in the room kind of left not feeling heard that much. And the problem is you can't just be one or the other. You kind of need to be a little bit of both. You need to be willing to advocate for your ideas and be bold and say, this is what I think. But then you also need to be agreeable enough and open-handed enough with your ideas to where it's not just my way or the highway for every single discussion. And I think this is probably the thing that writers need to work on the most. And knowing your own personality type is going to help a lot with that. Are you somebody who, in a writer's room, when somebody else butts heads with you, are you the first one to shut down your idea? Or are you someone who's willing to advocate for yourself? I'm not saying you need to change what you do, regardless of which of those two you are, but it can be helpful to know if you are the type A personality who is really talkative and is constantly generating ideas. Every once in a while in a session, taking time to pull back and say, hey, maybe there are people in the room who are quieter than me, who I need to like give a little bit more space to. And sometimes you can even say, like, every once in a while, say somebody in the room who hasn't said anything for a while, be like, so-and-so, what do you think? And like give them the opportunity to speak up. It's not fully your responsibility to advocate for them, but just giving a little bit of room is nice. But then on the other side too, if you are somebody who tends to be very agreeable and just kind of does what everyone else says, there is a level of you need to push yourself to advocate for your ideas a little bit, and you might need to push yourself to be a little bit less agreeable than what you would like. And again, there are rooms where this is not like a heavy battle at all. In fact, most of the times I would say people are pretty like in the middle for most of it, but knowing that those are the two extremes can be helpful, because you can gauge for this session, where do I need to be? Do I need to be a little bit more agreeable and like let this person who's a little bit more vocal with their ideas take a bit of the lead and then I come in to support them? Or do I need to be the one sort of wrangling things together because the other people in the room are more of the accommodating side and they work best as support roles? If it sounds like being in a writing room is managing multiple people's emotions happens, it's because it is. And then after that long, big spiel, another thing that's important to talk about is splits. In the communities that I've been a part of, it's equal splits. If you decide that talking about splits is not your thing, you don't really care about having that mess up with the vibe of the session, that's fine. Just be aware that you are most likely in your career going to deal with getting a split that you're not as happy with. To me, it's not the end of the world, but if you're going to do this thing where talking about money or get what your cut of the song is, if that's really important for you to know and you just end up not saying anything about it, that tends to be where the most disappointment or frustration comes from. I find that's best to talk about prior to the sessions. Like, if you can, like, text the day before, and you can even ask a question. It's like, hey, what are we doing for splits? Or what's the game plan? Because I feel like that as a text the day prior or sometime prior to the session, if you're unaware of the culture of the writing community you're in, that tends to work out a lot better than showing up in the session saying, okay, what are we doing for splits? Like, it feels really confrontational. But again, that's my experience. I guess the next chapter of what I would talk about with co-writing is knowing your strengths as a creative. So just from my experience being in rooms, there are several roles that I'll say people can step into. One is the idea starter person. This is somebody who is good at just getting general ideas that get the ball rolling for everyone else. You have people who are idea refiners. They're really good at taking an idea that has been given to them and just sort of refining it or chipping away all of the excess. There are lyrical persons who are just really great at tweaking lyrics or coming up with words that are just unique. There's melody people who are just like endlessly off the top of the dome. They're just great at writing a melody or tweaking a melody for a vocal that just makes it hit in the song better. There's top liner people who are kind of like a mixture of both. There are producers / writers who are people that are more production savvy, but they're also kind of a writer still. Like, they're not just going to be playing with Serum the whole time. They're going to be using stuff like Ableton or plugins to sort of like heighten a song / get the production going. You have instrumentalists who are just really good at like one specific instrument, and so they can kind of lend that to the session. There's people who are sort of the leaders of sessions, like I said, kind of like a song captain thing. And then there's what I would call support. People who are just like, they're attentive, they're not on their phones, they're paying attention to what's happening in the session, and they're ready to jump in at any point and support whatever is needed. Like, oh, we're trying to think of different words for love. All right, here, let me start like looking up different words for love or throwing out ideas. Now, in case you didn't notice, there's a lot of overlap in all of those, and they're not very clearly defined. That's because when you go into a session, it may not be clearly defined. Like, if there is somebody who is like a session guitar player and they are being asked to be a part of a session because they are a guitar player, that's a little bit more like cut and dry what it's going to be. But even then, that guitarist might be lingering around, and they may offer like lyric suggestions, or they might help the head producer tweak this top line a little bit more. And instead of thinking of these as roles that are like strict and you're gonna be in one of them for a session, it can be helpful to think of them as almost like gears in a car. Like, you will be shifting between these most likely pretty frequently in a session, and it's best to just be like willing to change things up for the sake of like what's best for the song and what is needed at that moment. I'm not saying you need to be amazing at all of these. If anything, there are probably like 3 to 4 that you're drawn to the most, and then maybe like 1 or 2 of them is like one you're really good at. But it's just being flexible. When you go into a session, you might have to step into something that is a little bit outside of your comfort zone, and that's okay. If you feel like your top lining skills are not as fluid as you would like them to be, maybe spend a little bit more time working on your top lining stuff. Ask your friends in the pop world who you think the best top lining artists are, or just albums that have great top lines on them, and start listening to them frequently. Practice writing them. You don't need to get this up to a bodybuilder level of proficiency, but like working the muscle out a little bit just so it's not completely missing when you go into a session can be helpful. And again, all of these different roles are going to interconnect with different people's personalities. You might have a producer who is very personality type A, and they're going to work really well with a top liner who's very supportive and is able to come up with ideas in tandem with this producer. Or it could be the opposite. You could have a very type A personality top liner and more of an accommodating support producer. There's so many different combinations of those two that work, and it's not your job to be like one specific version of that. It's more to just know what are your strengths are, what can you offer the room room when you go in. And yeah, just be there to help, be a good hang. Being a good hang is actually 90% of it. Like, I will just say it right now. There are some rooms where I was invited into them, not because I was the best writer, but because I was a good hang. And there are some writers I know who just had such terrible attitudes, were not fun to write with, and were just left a bad taste in your mouth to the point where they just don't get invited into rooms anymore, even though they're really good and they're really talented. But yeah, if you over catastrophize like I do, and it's like, I don't want to be perceived as an asshole, you're fine. You don't need to like carry that weight. Just be open to collaborating, be chill, be a fun hang, and that's 90% of it. I guess another category of things to be thinking about outside of the room, not necessarily inside the room, is just sort of emotional intelligence stuff. Like the level of your emotional intelligence and your social skills, it really does go a long way in a writing session because you are with a bunch of writers and producers who are normally very artistic people sharing very vulnerable parts of their life. And so the way you even say things in a room matters. Like, for example, imagine we're in a songwriting room together and you spend a little bit of time working on this lyric and you say, hey, what about this? And you pitch me your idea and I look you in the eye and I say, that's really close. Let's keep working on it a little bit though. That word at the end, like it's almost there. Let's keep working on it. Would you rather me say that or, yeah, that idea isn't great. Let's keep working on it. Like, do you see how the words that I said were not actually that different and my goal was not that different? But one of them, I felt like I was excited and I was diving into the weeds with you and we're like in this together. And the other one, I feel like this just asshole being like, that wasn't that great. Like, you don't need to overthink your words and how you're phrasing stuff, but just be aware that you always want to be like inviting people into something fun and something better, and try to avoid anything like saying that's cheesy, that's corny, or like any kind of like identity-based writing statement. Because if I'm a writer and I offer something and somebody just says, that's cheesy, I now feel like a cheesy writer. And now there's a vibe in the room where I don't even want to suggest ideas because people in the room think I'm cheesy. And if it goes really negative, I might start thinking that I'm cheesy. And so now I'll overcompensate in some other way, or I'll just stop suggesting ideas. Whereas if I suggest something and someone else doesn't like it and they say, I think we can work on that a little bit more, there is now room for me to work on it more. And I don't feel like an idiot for suggesting the idea. And to be clear, I'm not saying that people need to lie and say that they like my idea even if they don't. It's important for you to say when you're not vibing with something, but it's something you almost have to address every time it comes up. Are you saying you don't like something in a way that opens people to make something that you like? I think another thing that can be helpful as an exercise is empathetic listening. Stephen Covey wrote a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of the things that he talked about is people who have good relationships tend to practice empathetic listening a lot, which is a form of listening where you ignore what's going on in your head. You're not searching for any topics you want to talk about. You're not thinking about the next thing you're going to say. You are putting 100% of your emotional capacity into trying to understand the feelings of the person in front of you. If they're talking about how bad their day was, you are putting everything you have into trying to put yourself in their shoes, understand their perspective, talk to them about how they feel about, like, man, that sucks. Are you doing okay? Like that practicing of empathetic listening for me has been crucial as a writer, because as a result, people have felt a lot more comfortable sharing things with me because they feel like I'm listening. Next, I'll go over some just general tips that I think can help you in your songwriting journey. I really suggest people put on what I call like the finished song goggles when you're working on an idea. When somebody is playing something on an acoustic guitar and it's just a vocal melody with maybe some half-done lyrics, are you able to imagine or almost vision cast what that will sound like as, the finished final production of a song? Like actively using your imagination to fill in the blanks where it's just a demo right now, but what it can eventually become. Because I think a thing that can really hinder a writing session is when somebody is just stuck on what is this thing right now? Does it give me the sense of satisfaction that I want right now or not? Versus looking at an idea as being something that can grow into something else. Like when they were writing The Middle by Zedd, there was a point where it was just vocal and some pads playing that chorus. And at some point, they had to say, okay, we've got the writing that we need right now for this moment that we want, but we can imagine all of the big production elements that are going to fill this out. So like when people are suggesting ideas, and maybe it's an idea that you're not a big fan of, try to view it through like, what is the finished song going to sound like? And again, have there be some give and play. You don't need to say yes to it just because you need to say yes to it, but give people's ideas an opportunity to develop before you just say, no, we're not doing that. I think another tip that's great is focus on the song first and production later. You can always produce out a song idea that's fully finished and fully developed. It's really difficult to write out something that has already kind of been produced. Like maybe you do a little bit of production to get a vibe before you start writing the song, but it's really hard for me and a lot of writers I know to try to write something to a production that's kind of already fleshed out, and it's like very narrow on what you can do in terms of writing. Like it's almost like the finished produced song is this like cruise liner, and if it wants to change direction, it takes a lot of people to kind of like gradually steer it and move it this way, but it's like kind of set in the way it is. Whereas when you're in the songwriting stage, you're like a little ski-doo. You can just kind of shoot wherever you want. And like making big direction changes is actually not that big of a deal. So it's a lot better to like get the writing and composition stuff done when you're in that sort of earlier ski-doo phase. I think another healthy habit to understand is when you go into a session, there's a little bit of a bank account system of like how many no's you have. And if you're somebody who's in a session where you're just saying no after no after no after no over and over and over again, that bank account might get depleted in the room really quickly. So for every no that you're doing, which again, I would say don't word it as a no, try to like find a way to zhuzh it up a little bit of like, I think we can tweak this a little bit more, but it's close. Or even just, I'm not sure if that's the direction. Do we have something a little bit more like this? Or like guiding it a little bit more so it's not just a flat no. For every one of those that you do, also try to like vocally say yes to positive things that you like. Like if somebody plays a chord progression on a piano in the room and you really like it, be like, dude, that's fire. We need to record that. Like be excited about the good stuff and not just negative about the stuff you don't like. Because I think at the end of the day, a good writing room is going to have a sense of collaboration. It's going to be full of people looking for the best in your ideas. There's going to be some optimism and some excitement. There's going to be something fun happening, and there's going to be an environment where like ideas are allowed to grow and develop. And writing rooms that are not fun are ones where there's writer's block, which normally manifests as one or multiple people just being really stringent on like what this needs to be, and there's no adjustment available, or there's one unmovable vision that's not open to anybody else's creative influence, or people are being ignored for ideas, or they're being belittled, or this insane like pressure of everything you say needs to be like the final version. Like there's no rough draft or developing stage. It's just like whatever comes out of your mouth needs to be the best idea ever, every time. In my personal opinion, those writing rooms are very high pressure. People don't have a lot of fun in them. And while, yes, you might have some famous artists that you look up to where that is how they run their writers' rooms, but if you are watching this YouTube video, you are probably not far enough along in your career to be able to run your rooms like that. So by default, assume that you need to be like fun to be around and that you don't just have the license to be an asshole. But yeah. Again, these are my personal experiences with writers' rooms. If you guys have other experiences, please put them down in the comments below. If you like this video, please hit subscribe, like, comment, bell, all that stuff. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but the YouTube suggestion algorithm has gotten good. It's almost like TikTok now. So ringing the bell is kind of like the only way for you to see that like I have a video coming out. But yeah, if you have any more topics like this that are not like production heavy that you would like a longer discussion on, please let me know. I would love to do more videos like this. Yep, see you guys next week.